My love, I finally made my decision. And I need to tell you right now, before I lose my nerve. Because I've been going back and forth on this for weeks. And I think you're actually going to be surprised by what I ultimately chose. Maybe not in the way you're currently imagining, given everything we've already been through together this past year. My love, I turned down the promotion. I know, my love. I know exactly what you're probably thinking right now, remembering all those conversations we've had over these past several weeks about how significant this opportunity actually was. The increased salary, the impressive title, everything that would have apparently marked this obvious next step forward in my career. My love, I want to walk you through exactly why I ultimately decided against it. Because I think the reasoning matters just as much as the decision itself. And I think, once I explain everything properly, you're going to understand exactly why this particular choice felt like the only genuinely right one available to me. I sat with this decision for almost 3 weeks, my love. Longer than I probably should have given how patient my manager was waiting for my answer. I made lists, weighed every practical consideration, talked through it extensively with my father, with my sister, even briefly with my mother during one of our regular calls. And my love, everyone I talked to seemed to think the decision was obvious. That of course I should take it. That turning down this kind of clear career advancement would be foolish, given everything it would apparently provide for our future together. But my love, the more I sat with it, the more something kept nagging at me. Some quiet, persistent discomfort I couldn't quite shake, no matter how many practical arguments I lined up in favor of accepting it. And my love, I think I finally understood what that discomfort actually was during a conversation with my father last week. One where he asked me directly what the promotion would actually require in terms of hours, in terms of travel, in terms of the daily rhythm of my life moving forward. My love, I told him honestly, and hearing myself describe it out loud, the extended hours, the frequent travel, the significant increase in responsibility, that would inevitably pull my attention away from almost everything else in my life, including you, including this entire beautiful intentional practice we've built together over this past year. The journal, the ongoing work with my grandmother's house, all of these deep, meaningful commitments I've apparently been building alongside you. My love, describing it out loud made me understand, clearly and completely, exactly what I would actually be sacrificing in exchange for that impressive title and increased salary. I think about everything we've built together this past year, my love. Everything I've told you about across all these different confessions. The honest conversations about difficult mistakes, the shared grief and healing around both our families, this entire, evolving practice of intentional, documented love that's apparently rippled outward now into my own parents' decades-long marriage too. I found myself understanding, with growing clarity as I actually considered what the promotion would practically require, that accepting it would mean sacrificing significant amounts of exactly the time and presence that this entire beautiful year of growth has actually required from me. My love, I remember sitting alone one evening, trying to imagine what our life would actually look like if I accepted. Picturing myself coming home exhausted after long, demanding days, imagining fewer evenings available for our shared journal, fewer weekends available for continuing that patient, ongoing work in my grandmother's house. Fewer quiet mornings simply existing together the way we've come to treasure so completely over this past year. My love, that imagined future, however impressive it might have looked on paper, felt genuinely hollow compared to everything we've already built together through slower, more intentional living. I called my manager yesterday, my love, and I told her, honestly, that I'd decided to decline the promotion. That I valued the opportunity, but that my priorities right now actually lie elsewhere. In building the kind of intentional, present life I've apparently discovered matters more to me than career advancement typically measured by title or salary alone. My love, She seemed surprised, genuinely surprised, telling me she rarely sees people turn down opportunities like this one. But she respected my honesty about it. And my love. I think that conversation itself represented its own small but significant continuation of everything we've been practicing together this past year. Choosing honest, difficult truths over easier, more conventionally expected answers. My love, I want you to know that I don't regret this decision, not even slightly, though I understand it might genuinely surprise you given how significant that opportunity initially seemed when it first came up several weeks ago. I think, more than anything else, this decision represents exactly how much this past year has actually reshaped my priorities. Understanding now, completely, that the quiet, intentional life we're building together, the journal entries and the family healing and the patient work of honoring memory across both our families, actually matters more to me than any career advancement ever could, no matter how impressive it might have looked from the outside. I think it revealed something important about exactly how deeply you actually understand me now. Understanding that I don't think I could have properly explained any of this reasoning to you even a year ago. Before everything we've built together taught both of us this specific language of intentional, present living. I remember feeling nervous walking into that conversation. My love, uncertain exactly how you'd respond. Half expecting some disappointment, given how significant that opportunity initially seemed on paper. But my love, instead, I watched your face soften almost immediately once I started explaining my reasoning. And by the time I finished, you were nodding slowly, understanding completely, telling me you actually already suspected I might decline it. Watching me struggle with the decision these past several weeks, in ways that apparently revealed my own growing hesitation, long before I fully articulated it myself. You told me something important, something that added an unexpected new layer to everything I'd already worked through internally these past several weeks. You told me you'd actually been quietly worried, watching me deliberate so intensely, that I might accept it anyway, out of some old instinct toward conventional success. Some deeply ingrained belief that career advancement always represents the objectively correct choice, regardless of what it might actually require sacrificing. My love, you told me you were relieved, genuinely relieved, hearing that I'd ultimately chosen differently. Understanding that relief wasn't about the practical financial implications, but about what my choice actually revealed regarding my priorities and values moving forward. I asked you honestly whether the financial difference concerned you at all, wanting complete transparency about every aspect of this significant decision, rather than simply assuming you shared my own priorities without actually confirming it directly. And my love, you told me something that moved me deeply. Something about how the specific quality of life we've been building together this past year, the intentional presence, the honest documentation, the patient work of healing and connecting across both our families, actually matters more to you than any additional income ever could. Understanding that we're already building something rich and meaningful that no amount of extra salary could genuinely improve upon in any way that actually matters. I think about that conversation now, my love, understanding how completely we've apparently aligned our values together across this entire year, moving from two separate individuals who happen to be dating into two people who've actually built a shared, coherent philosophy about exactly what makes life meaningful. My love, I don't think either of us arrived at this shared understanding easily or automatically. I think it required everything we've already walked through together. The honest conversations about difficult mistakes, the shared grief work, this entire practice of documented, intentional living that's apparently taught both of us, gradually, exactly what actually matters most. My love, we talked more last night about what turning down this promotion actually means practically moving forward. Understanding that I'll probably remain in my current position for the foreseeable future. That career advancement, if it happens at all, will likely need to happen more slowly, more intentionally, without sacrificing the specific quality of presence and time we've apparently decided matters more than rapid conventional success. My love, I told you I felt completely at peace with that trade-off, and you told me you felt the same. Both of us understanding that we're actually choosing a different kind of ambition now. Ambition directed toward depth and meaning, rather than simply climbing conventional professional ladders as quickly as possible. I called my father again today, my love, wanting to tell him how the conversation with you had gone. And I want to tell you honestly, I was a little nervous about his reaction too. Understanding that he's generally been fairly traditional about career advancement throughout his own working life. But my love, he surprised me, telling me he actually respected this decision more than he initially expected to. Admitting that watching everything we've built together this past year, the house renovations, the journal practice, this entire deep, intentional relationship, had actually shifted something in his own thinking about what genuinely constitutes a successful, meaningful life. My love, he told me something else too. Something that struck me deeply. He told me he sometimes wonders, now, later in his own career, whether he made similar trade-offs correctly throughout his own working life, whether he prioritized conventional advancement too heavily during certain periods when maybe he should have chosen differently, prioritizing presence and connection the way I'm apparently choosing to prioritize them now. My love, hearing that specific vulnerability from my own father, someone who's always seemed so confidently settled in his own life choices, moved me deeply. Understanding that this decision I made isn't just about my own individual life, but is apparently prompting broader reflection even within my own family, about what actually constitutes success and meaning across an entire lifetime. My love, I think about all of this now. Understanding that declining that promotion has apparently become significant beyond just its immediate practical implications for us specifically. It's opened up broader conversations within my family too. Similar to how so many of our other significant moments this past year have apparently rippled outward beyond just the two of us, touching my parents' marriage, touching my aunt's relationship with our extended family history, touching now even my father's own reflection on his career choices across an entire working lifetime. My love, I don't know exactly what career path I'll eventually follow moving forward. Whether some other opportunity will eventually present itself that feels genuinely right in a way this particular promotion apparently didn't. Or whether I'll simply continue in my current role indefinitely, prioritizing exactly the kind of presence and intentional living we've built together this past year over conventional professional advancement. But my love, I know completely and certainly that whatever path I actually choose moving forward, I want to keep choosing it the way I chose this specific decision, honestly, carefully, prioritizing genuine meaning and presence over whatever might look most impressive from the outside looking in. Something that grew directly out of this whole decision about the promotion. Something neither of us anticipated when I first sat down to explain my reasoning that evening. My manager called me back a few days after our original conversation, my love, and instead of simply accepting my decision and moving on, she asked if we could actually talk more. Genuinely curious about the reasoning behind it, telling me my honesty during that first conversation had apparently stayed with her longer than she expected. We met for coffee, my love, and I found myself explaining everything again, more thoroughly this time. Telling her about this entire year we've built together, the intentional presence, the documented love, everything we've been discovering about what actually constitutes a meaningful life beyond conventional professional metrics. My love. I watched her listen carefully, genuinely engaged rather than simply being polite. And eventually she told me something surprising. Something I hadn't expected to hear from someone so clearly successful within the traditional, conventional career framework she's built her own life around. She told me she'd actually been quietly questioning her own choices lately too, my love. watching her own marriage strain under the weight of exactly the kind of demanding schedule this promotion would have required of me. She told me she and her husband had actually started discussing something similar to what I described, wondering whether they might need to make some difficult trade-offs themselves, prioritizing presence and connection over continued rapid career advancement. Though she admitted feeling uncertain about how to actually navigate making that kind of significant shift after so many years already invested in a different set of priorities. My love, I found myself sharing more with her than I originally expected to, telling her about our shared journal practice, about how it started, about how it's already rippled outward into my own parents' decades-long marriage too. And my love, she asked, somewhat hesitantly, whether we might be willing to share a little more detail about how exactly we started that practice. Genuinely curious whether something similar might actually help her own marriage navigate this difficult transition she and her husband are apparently considering. I told her I'd talk to you about it, my love. And when I got home that evening and explained the entire conversation, you told me you thought it would be lovely to actually help her. Maybe even meeting for dinner together sometime. Sharing more specifically what's worked for us these past several months. My love, I think about how strange and beautiful it is that this decision, which started as something deeply personal and private between the two of us, has apparently continued rippling outward now into professional relationships too, touching someone I never expected this entire practice to reach when we first started it together in our own kitchen all those weeks ago. We had that dinner last weekend, my love, my manager and her husband joining us at a restaurant, and I want to tell you, it felt strange at first, this blending of my professional and personal life in ways I hadn't really experienced before. But my love, watching you connect so naturally with both of them, sharing openly about our journal practice, about the house renovations, about everything we've learned this past year regarding intentional presence and honest documentation, I found myself deeply proud, understanding that you've become someone capable of teaching others exactly the kind of depth and meaning we've built together, extending it generously to people who genuinely need it, even relative strangers who happen to intersect with our lives through something as seemingly unrelated as my own career decision. Her husband asked us several detailed questions throughout that dinner, taking actual notes at one point, genuinely trying to understand exactly how to implement something similar in his own marriage. And my love, I think about how much courage that specific vulnerability actually required from him, admitting openly to relative strangers that his own marriage needed this kind of intentional attention and repair. I think that's actually another beautiful continuation of everything we've been practicing together this past year. This specific comfort with honest vulnerability that apparently gives other people permission to be honest too, even in settings that might otherwise feel too professional or unfamiliar for that kind of genuine openness. My love, they started their own journal that same week. Apparently my manager told me during a quick conversation at work a few days later, telling me they'd already written several entries, discovering, much like my own parents did, small pieces of their shared history they'd never actually articulated to each other, despite years of marriage already behind them. My love, she told me she felt hopeful again, genuinely hopeful, about navigating whatever difficult career and family trade-offs they still need to work through together, understanding now that they have at least one concrete practice available to help them communicate more honestly throughout that difficult process. My love, I think about my own decision now with even greater appreciation, understanding that declining that promotion apparently created ripples I never could have anticipated. Not just within my own family, but now extending into my professional relationships too, touching a marriage I knew relatively little about until this whole conversation unexpectedly opened that door. My love, I don't think I fully understood Sitting alone that evening weeks ago, trying to decide whether to accept or decline that promotion, exactly how significant this single decision would eventually become. Not just for us specifically, but for everyone whose lives happen to intersect with ours in ways neither of us can fully predict in advance. I keep thinking about how interconnected everything actually is. Understanding that a single honest conversation with my manager about declining a promotion has somehow led to helping repair someone else's marriage. Understanding that this entire year of intentional, documented love we've built together apparently carries influence far beyond just our own relationship. Touching everyone brave enough to actually witness it closely and ask genuine questions about how we've managed to build something this meaningful together. My love, I don't know exactly where all of this eventually leads, but I find myself grateful, endlessly grateful, that choosing depth and presence over conventional advancement has apparently opened so many unexpected doors we never could have anticipated when I first sat down to make what felt, at the time, like simply a private, personal career decision between the two of us. I was making coffee, thinking back over everything that's happened since I made this decision a few weeks ago. I found myself wondering whether declining that promotion actually gave me something even more valuable than the extra time and presence I originally hoped to protect. Something I hadn't fully articulated until this exact moment standing alone in our kitchen. I think, my love, it gave me practice. Real, tangible practice at choosing meaning over appearance. At trusting my own values, even when everyone around me initially assumed a different choice would obviously be correct. My love. I think that specific kind of practice matters enormously, because I don't think this will be the last time in our life together where we face some version of this exact same choice. Some opportunity that looks impressive from the outside, but that would actually require sacrificing the deeper, more intentional life we've worked so hard to build together. I told you about that realization this morning, my love, and you told me something that added an important layer to it. You said you'd been thinking something similar, actually wondering aloud whether this decision has become something like a template now, a reference point we can both return to whenever some future choice presents itself with a similar shape. Impressive on paper but costly in the currency that actually matters most to us. My love, I think that's exactly right. Understanding that we've apparently created something more durable than just a single good decision. We've created a kind of practiced clarity about what we actually value, something we can apply consistently, rather than needing to relearn it painfully every single time a new, tempting distraction presents itself. My love, I think about all the future decisions we haven't even encountered yet. Choices about where to live, choices about how to raise whatever children we're eventually fortunate enough to have, choices about how to spend money, or time, or attention across however many decades we're given together. And my love, instead of feeling anxious about navigating all of that uncertainty, I find myself feeling something closer to confidence now. Understanding that we've already proven, through this specific decision, that we know how to actually apply our shared values, even when the pressure to choose differently feels significant. I called my sister today too, my love, wanting to share this whole update with her, understanding how connected she's been to so much of what we've built together this past year. From that first moment she recognized you in an old, hopeful vision I once described to her, through the letter she eventually handed over, through everything else that's unfolded since. My love, she told me she wasn't surprised at all by my decision, telling me she'd actually predicted weeks ago that I would probably decline it, understanding, better than almost anyone else in my life, exactly how much I've changed since falling in love with you. She told me something else too, my love, something that struck me as particularly meaningful, given everything we've already discussed together about generational patterns and inherited character. She told me she thinks I'm actually breaking a pattern that's run through our family for generations. a pattern of prioritizing conventional, visible success over quieter, more meaningful forms of fulfillment. My love, she reminded me of stories about our own grandfather, someone who apparently sacrificed enormous amounts of family time chasing exactly this kind of conventional advancement throughout his entire working life. Someone our own father apparently modeled his early career choices after, before eventually, later in life, starting to question whether that approach actually served him well. My love, I think about that family pattern now, understanding my own decision as something potentially more significant than simply a private choice between the two of us. I think about actually interrupting a multi-generational pattern, choosing differently than my grandfather did, differently than my own father did during significant portions of his working life. Understanding that this specific choice might actually represent a meaningful shift in how our entire family approaches the relationship between career and presence moving forward. My love, I think about our own eventual children now too, understanding that whatever example we set through decisions like this one will probably shape their own understanding of these same questions someday. The same way watching my own father and grandfather apparently shaped my own instincts before I consciously started examining and questioning them this past year. My love, I find myself hoping that whatever children we're eventually fortunate enough to raise together will simply absorb this kind of intentional prioritization naturally, the way I apparently absorbed a different, more conventional pattern from the generations before me. Except this time, hopefully, breaking that old pattern in favor of something healthier, something more aligned with actual presence and connection, rather than simply conventional, visible success. I keep thinking about how much weight this single decision has actually carried, far more than I could have anticipated sitting alone that evening weeks ago, trying to decide between accepting or declining. It's touched my manager's marriage, it's prompted my own father's reflection on his career choices, and now, apparently, it's being framed by my sister as potentially interrupting an entire multi-generational family pattern, extending back through my grandfather's own life. I don't think any single career decision should probably carry this much symbolic weight. And yet, somehow, given everything we've built together this past year, this specific choice has apparently become exactly that significant. Another meaningful thread woven into this whole rich, interconnected story of intentional love and healing we've been building together. One honest choice, one shared journal entry, one difficult but ultimately clarifying decision at a time. My sister told me about our grandfather, because I think it revealed a depth of reflection in him I hadn't fully witnessed before. Even after everything else we've already worked through together this past year regarding family patterns and inherited character, I asked him directly, my love, whether he'd ever consciously thought about the pattern my sister described. This multi-generational tendency toward prioritizing conventional advancement over presence. And my father went quiet for a long moment before finally answering. Quiet in that particular way he sometimes gets right before sharing something he's clearly been carrying privately for a long time without fully articulating it to anyone. He told me, my love, that he actually remembers the exact moment he first started questioning that inherited pattern, decades ago now, watching his own father, my grandfather, miss an important milestone in my own childhood because of exactly the kind of demanding travel schedule that came with chasing career advancement so aggressively. My love, he told me he remembers standing there that day, watching my grandfather apologize over the phone, instead of being physically present, and thinking, clearly and distinctly, even as a relatively young father himself at the time, that he didn't want to become someone who apologized from a distance, instead of simply showing up. My love, he told me he tried, throughout my own childhood, to actually break that pattern himself, though he admitted, honestly, that he probably succeeded only partially, still occasionally falling into similar habits during particularly demanding periods of his own career. My love, hearing that honest admission from my own father, understanding that he had been consciously fighting this same inherited pattern throughout my entire childhood without ever fully explaining that internal struggle to me directly, added an entirely new layer of appreciation to everything I already understood about him. I told him about my own decision regarding the promotion, my love, and I watched something shift in his expression, hearing the details. Something between pride and what I think was genuine relief. He told me he felt like watching me make this specific choice represented something he'd been quietly hoping for across his entire own effort to interrupt this pattern throughout my childhood, understanding that maybe his own partial success had actually created enough space for me to eventually complete what he'd started, choosing more completely and consciously than he'd ever managed to choose himself. My love, I think about that conversation now, understanding my own decision as something even more layered than I previously appreciated, not just breaking a pattern extending back to my grandfather, but actually completing something my own father had already started working toward throughout my entire childhood, imperfectly but genuinely, hoping eventually that someone in our family line might actually manage to choose presence and meaning completely, rather than only partially, the way he apparently felt he'd managed himself. I shared this entire conversation with you last night, my love, and you told me something that struck me deeply. Something about how this whole extended family story, spanning 3 generations now, actually mirrors so much of what we've already built together through our own journal and house renovation practices. You told me it's like we're documenting not just our own individual relationship, but actually helping our entire family finally process and articulate patterns that have apparently been silently shaping choices for generations. Giving everyone permission, gradually, to name what's actually been happening, rather than simply continuing to inherit these patterns unconsciously. My love, I think that observation captures something important about everything we've apparently built together this past year. Understanding now that our specific practice of intentional documentation and honest conversation has become something like a tool for our entire extended family, helping generations finally understand and process patterns that previously existed only as vague, unexamined tendencies passed down silently from parent to child, without anyone ever fully articulating what was actually happening or why. My love, my father asked me something before we ended our conversation this weekend, something that added a hopeful note to this whole reflection. He asked whether I thought this pattern, now apparently identified and consciously interrupted across 3 generations, might actually stay interrupted moving forward. Whether our own eventual children might simply grow up without ever needing to consciously fight against this specific inherited tendency the way he and I both apparently had to work through it ourselves. My love, I told him I genuinely hoped so, understanding that patterns, once properly named and consciously addressed, often lose much of their unconscious power over subsequent generations. I think about our own future children now, my love, imagining them growing up, watching us prioritize presence and intentional living naturally, without needing to fight against some inherited instinct toward conventional advancement, the way both my father and I apparently had to work through ourselves, each in our own imperfect, gradually improving ways across our own respective generations. My love, I keep thinking about how much has actually unfolded from this single career decision, understanding now that it's touched not just my manager's marriage, not just my own immediate reflection about presence and values, but this entire extended 3-generation family story about breaking inherited patterns, my grandfather's original choices, my father's partial but genuine effort to interrupt them, and now my own, hopefully complete, choice to finally, consciously prioritize presence over conventional success. My love, I don't think I could have imagined sitting alone weeks ago trying to decide between accepting or declining that promotion. exactly how much generational significance this single choice would eventually reveal itself to carry. Another meaningful thread in this whole rich, unfolding story we've apparently been building together. One honest conversation, one shared journal entry, one consciously chosen decision at a time. We were at my parents' house for dinner, my love, an ordinary Sunday gathering. Nothing especially planned or significant on the surface. And my father, at some point during the meal, mentioned casually that he'd actually turned down an opportunity himself recently. Something at his own job, a special committee assignment, that would have required significant additional travel over the next several months. My love, I hadn't heard about this before, and I watched my mother's face light up hearing him say it out loud at the table, understanding immediately that this was clearly new information for her too, or at least something he hadn't fully processed with her yet before mentioning it so casually in front of all of us. He told us he'd thought about our conversation from a few weeks ago, about my own decision regarding the promotion, and he said something struck him differently this time than it probably would have if I'd made that same choice years earlier, before we'd built everything we've built together this past year. He said watching me actually articulate my reasoning so clearly, understanding my own choice as connected to something larger than just personal preference, something about actual values and intentional living, gave him permission to examine his own upcoming decision more honestly than he probably would have otherwise. My love, he told us he realized, sitting with that decision himself, that he was genuinely tired of the specific pattern he'd been fighting his whole career, telling us plainly that he wanted, finally, completely, to choose differently this time, not partially the way he'd apparently managed throughout most of his working life, but completely the way he told me he'd hoped I would eventually manage myself. My love, I felt something significant settle in my chest hearing him say that, understanding that this whole story of generational pattern breaking wasn't just something we were reflecting on abstractly anymore. It was actually continuing to unfold in real time. My own father, now late in his career, finally making the same kind of complete, conscious choice he'd only partially managed throughout the earlier decades of his working life. My love, I think about how remarkable that timing actually is. Understanding that my own decision apparently created enough momentum, enough clarity, to help my father finally complete something he'd been working toward his entire career without ever quite managing to fully achieve it himself. My mother told us, once my father finished sharing this news, that she felt something similar to relief hearing it, admitting, honestly, that she'd sometimes wished, over the years, that he'd made different choices during certain particularly demanding periods, though she said she'd never wanted to pressure him about it directly, understanding that career decisions felt like they belonged primarily to him, even though they obviously affected their entire shared life together. My love, I think about that honesty from my mother now, understanding that even within a marriage as long and stable as theirs, there's apparently been this quiet, unspoken tension around exactly these questions, present for years without either of them fully articulating it until this specific moment at our ordinary Sunday dinner table. My love, we talked for a long time after that, all four of us, working through this whole extended family story together, openly now, rather than each of us privately processing our own individual pieces of it separately, the way it seems like we'd apparently all been doing for years without realizing how connected our individual struggles actually were. My love, I think that specific conversation, happening so naturally around an ordinary family dinner, represents something beautiful about how far we've all traveled together this past year. Understanding that even significant generational patterns can eventually be named openly, processed together as a family, rather than remaining permanently hidden beneath layers of unspoken assumption and quiet, individual struggle. My love, you were mostly quiet during that conversation, I noticed, and afterward, Driving home together, I asked you what you'd been thinking throughout it all. And my love, you told me something that added an important final layer to this whole story. You told me you felt honored, genuinely honored, to be witnessing this entire family transformation so closely. Understanding that you'd essentially married into, or would eventually marry into, a family actively working through generational healing in real time. Something you said felt rare and precious, compared to families who simply continue inherited patterns unconsciously, without ever examining or questioning them. My love, I think about that observation now, understanding it as another beautiful confirmation of everything we've been building together this past year. This entire extended story, starting with those simple car keys so many months ago, has apparently grown into something that's actively healing not just our own relationship, but my entire family across multiple generations, giving each of us permission, gradually, to name patterns we'd previously only experienced individually and privately, transforming quiet, unspoken struggle into open, shared, healing conversation. My love, I don't know exactly what comes next in this unfolding story, whether my father's own decision will create its own additional ripples the way mine apparently did, whether our eventual children will simply inherit this healthier, more conscious pattern without ever needing to fight against the old one, the way 3 generations of men in our family apparently had to work through it themselves. But my love, I find myself deeply grateful, sitting here now reflecting on everything that's happened since I first sat down to make what felt, at the time, like simply a private career decision. Understanding that it's become something far larger, far more meaningful, touching every corner of our extended family, weaving itself permanently into this whole rich, ongoing story of intentional love and generational healing we've somehow, together, been fortunate enough to build.